I have a genuine question, ArenaNet. Do you like my rants so much that you want to genuinely confuse and befuddle me with your patches to make me want to rant about your questionable actions? Don't get me wrong, the whole patch in general is good, great even. However, when all the classes are getting buffs and skill functionality reworks, the one with shortest straw will stand out. Furthermore, there's more than few builds currently in the game in need of downward adjustments. And Bladesword wasn't fucking one of them. Let's get into it. From general changes, Blasting Dark Field will now grant Dark Aura instead of AoE Blind. Elementalist's hammer get a portion of its damage steroids from spinning Fire Orb baked directly into its skills, so that Hammer Kata in PvE can catch up to Hammer Tempest in the same mode. When it comes to modes where changes matter, Ether Renewal will heal for 50% more in all 3 game modes. Signet of Water will now cleanse in addition to its healing, so maybe it isn't dogshit anymore. Cleansing Fire is now a self-only Shake It Off, cleansing and breaking stance on cast. Arcane Power gets reworked into Arcane Echo, essentially working like Mesmer's Mimic skill, but for weapon skills specifically. Double Obsidian Flesh just have been reinstated into the game. Glyph of Elemental Power will now cast an AoE with different effects based on elements instead of just applying different conditions. Fire is damage and burn, water is cleanse, air is an AoE daze, and earth is an AoE barrier. Pyromancer's Punisance will no longer eat your might, Blinding Ashes get a boot and gets replaced with Inferno, a trait that will make your burning scale with power and not condition damage, but will have reduced scaling. Soothing Disruption was changed to grant different boons per cantrip, Arcane Lightning will grant quickness on cast of Arcane Echo, Elemental Bastion will now grant Alacrity on Aura share in PvE, so you're not stuck doing overloads for the entire eternity. Weaver's Tailored Victory, that's his elite skill, no longer roots you on cast. Engineer gets Elixir buffs. Elixir B extends duration of boons already on you, Elixir C heals you based on how many boons you have, and Elixir R now breaks stuns but has longer cooldown in versus modes to compensate. Detection Pulse is now a ground targeted AoE that will daze and blind in the middle of it, and reveal in larger radius around the central AoE. Fumigate now cleanses conditions, Bomb Kit was reworked with Firebomb now burning on first pulse, Concussion Bomb changed to Galvanic Bomb that dazes and electrocutes its area of kaboom, Smoke Bomb was changed into Magnet Bomb, that as you can guess pulls enemies to its center, and is a new toolbelt skill for Bomb Kit, and the Big Old Bomb is a new skill 5, and it's even bigger and has 2 blast finishers. Flamethrower was also reworked. Now its skill 2 projectile no longer hit enemies it passes through, but initial explosion is more damaging. Smoke Vent is now a toolbelt skill, its new skill 4 is an AoE that gives you might and quickness, and its new skill 5 is a supercharged auto attack that does a lot of damage. Juggernaut trait was also changed to no longer reward having negative skill and will now only grant stability on use of Flamethrower skill 5, but now also grants Fire Aura. Grenadier trait velocity increase was baked into grenades themselves. Flashbang trait is replaced with Grant Entrance that makes your explosive entrance grant resistance. Hematic Focus will grant Fury on bleeding application. Angie gets Unstoppable Onslaught and Stalwart Strength glued together as a trait, because fuck me if Warrior gets to keep anything that's unique. Iron Blooded gets changed to Chain Reactivity, which will make your Leap and Blast finishers give you barrier upon successful activation. And Gadgeteer will now make Slick Shoes break stuns, and Utility Goggles will grant barrier instead of protection. Holoforge skill 5 now evades on startup, and Prime Light Beam does more damage in PvP. Vent Exhaust, that's losing hit on dodge, will now also grant Vigor. Guardian gets improvement tracking on Scepter autos. and reduced cooldown on Scepter 3. Focus 4 will now hit in AoE, calling a Ray of Judgment to all enemies hit and cleansing on allies hit, but its damage and hit count were reduced. Focus 5 gets reduced cooldown. Greatsword 3 heals for more on initial target and less on secondary targets. Its skill 4 now deals higher damage on initial pulse. Greatsword 5 projectiles can now only hit their initial target, and DOT damages from different guardians will now stack. Also, pull was strengthened to make it more consistent. Staff 5 will now have cast time reduced by 60%. Signet of Wrath will now burn the target it immobilizes, and Signet of Judgment will blind and weaken nearby foes instead of burning them. Shield of the Avenger will grant protection, and Dragon Hunter's Heavy Light will now affect defiant enemies with the exposed debuff. Mesmer gets staff cooldown buffs. Clones will no longer interrupt casting while getting Mirage Cloak. Furious Interruption will now grant Fury. Power Block ate shit as it deserved, no longer increasing the cooldown of interrupted skills, but will now grant temporary damage buff instead. Evasive Mirror will be changed to Wandering Mind, cleansing debilitating conditions and granting swiftness on successful evades. Chrono's Flow of Time will now make your crit chance higher when you have Alacrity. Danger Time now increases crit damage instead of crit chance. Illusionary Reversion now grants Alacrity. And Improved Alacrity no longer increases crit damage. Greatsword Mirage Ambush does about 20% more damage in PvE. Staff Mirage Ambush gives boons in larger area. Mirage Mantle will be changed to make ambush skills grant boons in the area. So goodbye a permanent 15% spear ambush damage increase. Mirrored Axes will be changed to Phantom Pain and cause shatters to grant damage buff like Berserker's Power does to Mesmer's per clone shattered. And Dune Cloak will now reduce cooldowns of your Shatter 1 and 2 upon gaining Mirage Cloak. Necromancer gets a chock full of quality of life changes. Mark of Blood can now be triggered by allies or yourself to self-give regeneration. Paw Shroud 4 casts faster and generates double the life force. Warhorn 5 has its aftercast reduced, and Worm Minion will have reduced cooldown if it respawns due to you mounting whatever mount you prefer. Lich Form gets 30 seconds less cooldown, its autos now bleed, and its skill 2 will now show up to work, and will now chill and corrupt boons on hit. Transfusion will now make your marks triggerable by allies, and marks will give healing and boons on ally or self-trigger. You'll also drop staff skill 3 mark when you cast Shroud 4. Harbinger's Blight health penalty gets reduced in PvP. Necromancer is getting real dispatch. Ranger's Torch gets ammo and blindness on skill 4, and its skill 5 will now do more burning on initial hit. Quick Draw will now grant quickness, and Light on your feet will now trigger off of any evade, not just dodge specifically, and gets longer buff duration. Unstoppable Union will now grant protection on merging and unmerging instead of its previous effects. Cleansing Unleash will now show you when it's on cooldown, and Restorative Strikes will be changed to something called Biorhythm, giving you stacking bonus of lifesteal every few seconds your pet remains unleashed, and above certain thresholds of that buff, you'll get both effects of Vow of the Untamed every time you switch who's unleashed. Revenant gets resistance on movement skill from aggressive agility changed to activate on legend swap instead. Brutality will no longer remove stability, and will simply increase your damage to targets with Protent stability. Replenishing Despair will make you steal health from surrounding enemies when you gain Dark Aura, and your Permeating Pestilence will now grant Dark Aura in addition to its previous effects. Empowering Misery now grants Dark Aura, Banish Enchantments now applies Torment, and Call to Anguish gets a sequenced skill, where you slam the ground dealing damage and applying conditions. Righteous Rebel will now make Kala's Favor increase outgoing healing instead of reducing incoming damage. Redemptor's Sermon will now heal and grant protection on cast of healing skill, and Saint of Zuhalsa will make your dodge apply alacrity in PvE, so you can play dodge spam healer in raid groups. Thief's Dual Dagger 3 gets its bleeding duration halved but stacks doubled in PvE, and Pistol 5 gets its initiative cost back down to 7 in World v World. Scepter 2 and Scepter Pistol 3 get initiative cost increased to 4, but Spectre no longer has reduced initiative. Signet of Shadows grant Dark Aura, and Dagger Storm elite skill gets its bleeding stacks doubled. Mag trait will heal you for more. Even the Odds will grant its might for longer in versus modes. Revealed Training grants more stats, and Exposed Weakness has its damage increase per condition on target increased from 2% to 3%. Shielding Restoration will now grant Dark Aura in addition to its barrier. Shadow Savior will now grant you Dark Aura on steal, and heal in AoE around you when you grant yourself Dark Aura. Cover of Shadows will now drop an AoE giving prot to allies when you steal, and make your Dark Aura applications cleanse conditions. Distracting Daggers will no longer extend duration of interrupted skill, but will now grant you damage buff and refund initiative on successful interrupt. Escapist's Fortitude will heal for more in versus modes. Roller's Tenacity restores more endurance. Impacting Disruption will now reduce Steel's cooldown. Impaling Lotus Daggers can now only hit their respective initial targets, but do double the torment and triple the bleeding in PvE. Unhindered Combatant no longer gives you its debuff on removing Cripple, and gives only 2 seconds, not 3, on removing Chill. Spectre's Shade Step will now grant following effects to each of Shroud skill users. Skill 1 is a minor heal. Skill 2 grants alacrity in PvE and regen in versus modes. Skill 3 grants protection. Skill 4 heals like a beast, and Skill 5 grants Aegis. And now we reach the point where I'm slowly starting to lose my mind. Eviscerate gets longer range and higher damage on all 3 tiers in versus modes. Not to mention baked in crit chance steroid because devs forget they put burst precision in the game already. Cyclone Axe now grants half a second of fury more per hit than previously. And Throw Axe gets significantly reduced built-in damage increase against low targets, because devs don't understand that difference between hitting for 5 and 7k when target has 4k HP left literally only exists in theory. Skullcrack will now CC for marginally longer on all 3 tiers, and you will now be able to recast Counterblow mid-block to activate its damaging attack, and its damage was increased. Essentially, Mainhand Mace has now 1 skill other than auto attacks that can be used to follow up after a CC, meaning it's no longer the most counterintuitive weapon in Warrior's arsenal. And immediately following that...
Moving on, 100 Blades, getting some damage increase. Still can't move though, but you know, this is kind of a nod to, well, what is it, Taylor? Some of the two-handed weapons are a little bit behind right now.
Right. In PvE, Spear is really strong, and then with new dual wielding, one-handed weapons are super strong as well, and Greatsword and Hammer kind of felt left in the dust, so these are changes to make them feel up to par. 100 Blades is supposed to be a skill with identity of a lot of damage for the cost of standing still, and we want to keep that identity, so if it's not doing enough damage, we're increasing the damage.
Damn it! I don't even have strength to be angry anymore. 100 Blades PvE damage buff. Body Blows now grants vulnerability instead of bleeding. Merciless Hammer and Stalwart Strength get more damage in PvE. Berserker's Hit the Soul will now give more quickness in PvE. And Dead or Alive will now have flat heal on top of its current effects. And as a cherry on top, Blades won't changes, made with complete and utter ignorance of the fact that this spec can even be used in competitive modes. Artillery Slash goes down from 3 to 2 ammo in PvE. 2 ammo slash will deal the damage of old 3 ammo slash, and 1 ammo will do damage of old 2 ammo slash. It will now also guarantee stun on 2 ammo. And now a quick question for witty minded. How does that affect PvP and World v World versions of Artillery Slash? If it guarantees hard CC, will it lose its damage? Or will they just keep it unchanged in versus modes? Both options fucking suck. Because either Bladesworn loses his goddamn kill combo, or he's left to rot as he was. Dragon Spike Mine will now just spawn an explosion instead of spawning a landmine, meaning the chance it hits something was increased from none to slim. Overcharged cartridges, instead of letting you recast it to launch enemies, will let you recast it to increase the damage bonus you get from this skill, which would be great if the goddamn skill could be cast while charging Dragon Slash. But so far it cannot. We have to double tap this thing before entering Dragon Trigger, meaning it's physically impossible to make use of this stupid shit in either of the versus modes. Unless you're fighting an actual lobotomites or NPCs in World v World. I love PvE exclusive changes. It's fun to lie to ourselves and pretend like PvE players care for this thing even existing in the first place. Speaking of PvE, the first column of Bladesworn traits, the 3 flow generation ones, get their positive flow generated doubled in PvE. So maybe someone will pick up Bladesworn and be disappointed slightly later than usual. Moreover, Dragon Scale Defense no longer has internal cooldown, making all 3 Bladesworn mains in the world temporarily happy. And then comes Unshakable Mountain change, making one of those 3 unhappy and ultimately reducing total number of Bladesworn mains in the planet down by 1. Only 2 left to go. Unshakable Mountain, by the way, will now grant barrier for loading each of first few bullets while charging Dragon Slash. That might be a net buff depending on the numbers, but it will exacerbate the stationary nature of Bladesworn's gameplay, as you can no longer generate barrier on the fly, and it will force you to use much more of Whipstan's dumbfuckery to fabricate defenses, which will probably be cancer for both the user and the opponents, or only the user if barrier isn't sufficient enough. Moreover, there exists a high damage Axe Pistol Bladesworn build which used Unshakable Mountain to make itself playable, with Axe's power budget being funneled into burst skills, which for obvious reasons helps Bladesworn the most. I'm sarcastic, by the way. And the fact that Bladesworn can no longer generate barrier with his pistol combo and Axe 3 essentially means that we can tell that build goodbye. Now we'll have to wait and see what number does Arena slap on this thing, but most likely we'll either see Bladesworn become truly worthless, or be hotfix nerfed a week after the patch. Place your bets, gentlemen. And last but not least, Lush Forest has no internal cooldown anymore. More spam. Yes, this is what my heart was longing for. Thanks, ArenaNet. I really don't want to complain about receiving changes, but I can count 2, maybe 3, if I'm very optimistic, 4 changes in this patch for Warrior that aren't either screen filler or PvE number tweaking that 98% of player base won't pay a mind to. And a few bloody changes that are going to have any impact whatsoever, that's Eviscerate buff, Counterblow change, Dead or Alive change, and the Bladesworn's Fuckening, are not going to push any build using them, even the build using multiple of those, into any good state. Those won't even reach the state at which Spill Spellbreaker is right now, and that build is already falling behind the meta builds of other classes. And it will be even further behind after this patch, as pretty much every class got a string of buffs with either none at all or very little compensation. Some like Angie absolutely needed that, but I'm not going to pretend like Warrior didn't. And with the set of changes we got, the best we can hope for is 2 weeks of ArenaNet fucked the numbers, stand by for Bladesworn hotfix nerf, and return to irrelevance after that. At least we didn't suffer any direct nerfs, other than throw axe, so maybe we can claw our way out of this mess, or manage something interesting with one of new relics. Either way, it is going to be a second in a row nothing patch for Warrior, and I wouldn't blame you if you strongly considered not being a Warrior main anymore. However, I'm stuck here, whether I like it or not, so You can always bet on my apathetic ass to serve as a source of intel on whether the things ever improve. So, a big sign of gratitude to all the supporters, continuously considering my downward spiral towards apathy and entertainment worthy of their money. You're all truly welcome. Crabface out.